Stephen King has written a lot of novels. There have been a lot of movies, graphic novels, miniseries on television. There are just so many productions that make up the totality of what is the Stephen King universe. And when we say Stephen King universe, we're simply talking about all of the worlds that Stephen King has created. I am currently on a quest to read all of the novels that Stephen King has written, and I'm about 35 novels in at this point. My favorite part of the Stephen King universe is The Dark Tower, and one of the reasons for that is because a lot of other books that Stephen King has written, dozens I think, are part of that series in a way. For example, Stephen King's Insomnia is not part of the Dark Tower series, but it's kind of like a prophecy to the Dark Tower series. In that book, a little boy named Patrick obsesses about the gunslinger, and he draws him a lot. And Patrick ends up being a very important character in the Dark Tower series. So it's a prophecy to the Dark Tower. Black House by Stephen King and Peter Straub there. The primary antagonist in The Dark Tower is also the primary antagonist in Black House. So this is kind of how the Stephen King universe works. It's not that it's a bunch of different stories that are separate of one another. Many of the stories kind of bleed together. So that is what is so awesome about what Stephen King has done with all of his novels. The man maybe hasn't written a great novel every time he's written one, but they all kind of fit together to make up the Stephen King universe, and it's totally awesome. For example here, The Buick 8 is not a Dark Tower novel, but in The Buick 8, a very mysterious car shows up in the maybe late 1950s small town America, and the car is evil. It's alive, kind of. And no one in the town knows where it comes from or what's going on. The police get it and they keep it a secret. And it turns out that that car kind of teleported from the world that is the Dark Tower. That's really neat. Hearts in Atlantis. That book is a compilation of a couple of novellas and a few short stories. And in the first novella in the compilation that is Hearts at Atlantis, we meet a man named Ted Brodigan. And he shows up in maybe the early 1960s in a small town America. And the story is titled Low Men in Yellow Coats. And it is a story about a little boy that meets Ted Brodigan. And Ted is very strange. And it turns out that there are some people that are after Ted. And no one really knows why, but Ted knows, because Ted has escaped from a prison in the Dark Tower world by kind of time traveling with his mind, as he has a psychic ability. He time travels out of there, and he's kind of hiding from the Crimson King, who is the primary antagonist in the Dark Tower series. So it's a prison escape story, ultimately. And if you hadn't read the Dark Tower series, you would have no idea who was after Ted Brodigan. You might think it was the police or something, but ultimately they are a demon. It's a demon from hell from another world. So that's what's the most interesting thing about the Stephen King universe, is that many of the stories kind of come together and mesh to create just one big universe of happenings. I am currently on a quest to read all of the books that Stephen King has wrote, and maybe watch all the movies. I haven't seen many of them. But if you want to know more about Stephen King's universe and the Dark Tower series or whatever, you can pick up any one of his novels. As I said, they all kind of come together to create one big story. There are some novels that are truly independent and aren't part of anything more, but there are many stories that he's written that are part of one bigger story. It's totally worth the time, I think, to read it. There you have it. That is kind of a grossly understated definition of what the Stephen King universe is. I encourage you strongly to try a Stephen King novel at some point and see what you think.